Hi, San Jose. Welcome to our amazing Tiny Home on Wheels webinar. We're so happy to be here with you all today to share information about Tiny Home on Wheels in the city of San Jose's jurisdiction. My name is Sarah Shull. I work as the ADU ally in the city's Development Services Permit Center. I'll be your host today and share some general information about Tiny Home on Wheels to get us started. Jacob Switch is a planner too, and he'll join us to share specific Tiny Home on Wheels requirements and tell you how to apply for a Tiny Home on Wheels permit. Bruce Campbell is a building inspection manager, and he will share technical details and tips to help you get through the Tiny Home on Wheels inspection requirements and install a Tiny Home on Wheels on your property. Before we start, I wanted to cover some housekeeping topics. This webinar will be recorded and posted on our YouTube and Facebook pages. You can follow us using the last slide of this presentation and access those recordings after we go live today. Also, throughout the presentation, we will share 2 polls with you and ask you for your response. Your response to the polls can be provided anonymously if you prefer. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. Throughout the webinar, if you have questions, you can share it there. If you share a question, please do not share it anonymously. We will do our best to answer questions during the webinar as you ask them if we can. If we fall short of time and we can't answer during the webinar and there is time afterward, we'll try to answer your questions then. But by sharing your questions with your name, we can provide an answer afterward via email. If you'd rather not use the Q&A button right now, you can send an email to the ADU Ally email address that's shared at the end and give us your questions and we can provide a reply. Lastly, during this webinar, we are going to be referring to bulletin number 291, Tiny Home on Wheels permit checklist, and bulletin 213, inspection checklist for ADUs. Our city team is currently working to combine the Tiny Home on Wheels permitting and inspection information and requirements into a single Tiny Home on Wheels permit and inspection checklist. This is part of our commitment to provide comprehensive and effective ADU resources for residents and anyone accessing our information. So in the future, please refer to our web pages at sanjoseca.gov/ADUs, and it's posted all throughout this presentation. So you can stay up to date with all current ADU information and requirements. Now that we've covered those bits of information, let's start the webinar. So we're here to talk about amazing Tiny Home on Wheels in San Jose. Our presenters are me. My name is Sarah. I'm the ADU ally and I work in the Development Services Permit Center. Planner 2 is Jake, and he'll be sharing general ADU requirements and help you through the permit process. And Bruce Campbell is our building inspection manager, who's going to help us with the Tiny Home on Wheels inspection information. So the discussion overview, we'll first talk about Tiny Home on Wheels and the description, how to find out if your property is eligible for a Tiny Home on Wheels, what to do before you buy one, how to apply for a permit, and the inspection process and requirements. First up, I'll talk about the Tiny Home on Wheels description and property eligibility. What is a Tiny Home on Wheels? It's a type of accessory dwelling unit, which we call ADUs. Tiny Home on Wheels are only allowed on single family properties, and they have different requirements in a simpler, lower cost permit process than ADUs or junior accessory dwelling units, which we call JADUs. Tiny Home on Wheels shall be detached from the single family home. That means it does not share a wall with the single family home. And the allowed size range for Tiny Home on Wheels is from 150 square feet to 400 square feet. Continuing on with the description, it must be on wheels and not attached to a permanent foundation. If the wheels are removed and the unit is attached to a conventional foundation, the unit will no longer qualify as a Tiny Home on Wheels. But you can review the San Jose Municipal Code, Section 2030-406, and also see our ADU landing page and select the interactive button, what is the permit process, if you want to propose an ADU affixed to a permanent foundation. So going back to the tiny home on wheels, they cannot move under their own power, and they shall be towable by a bumper hitch, frame towing hitch, or fifth wheel connection. And they do not require their own address. So how do you find out if you can propose a tiny home on wheels on your property? You would want to look at Bulletin 291, Tiny Home on Wheels Permit Checklist, and do property research at our online records webpage, sjpermits.org. And you can use the hyperlinks here to visit those pages. We do have an image below from the Tiny Home on Wheels checklist that prompts you to look into the property and look at the zoning. And if there's a single family home on the lot, a tiny home on wheels is allowed. But you'll also want to consider what else is on the property. So the second question, as you can see, it says the main dwelling may either have an attached dwelling unit or an ADU or a junior ADU or a JADU. If the property has a detached ADU, then a tiny home on wheels would not be allowed. In addition to those key pieces that you'll want to look into, you'll also want to consider the tiny home on wheels placement on your lot. And homeowners can do this without the help of a professional to go in the backyard and just take a look. Can you meet these requirements? That a tiny home on wheels must be at least 6 feet from the single family home and any other buildings or structures that are more than 120 square feet. You'll want to also look at the title report for the property to make sure there are no easements. You'll want to look into the setback information, check if there are any power lines. You'll want to notice any existing trees and service drops. Service drops are overhead electrical lines running from a utility pole to an existing single family home. And like we talked about before, you'll want to consider any existing junior ADU or ADU on the lot. You can propose a tiny home on wheels on a property with a junior ADU or an attached ADU. Tiny home on wheels may not be proposed on a property that has a detached ADU. And on the photo on the right will show the visual of a service drop and the 10-foot public utility easement required for the power lines. So before you buy a tiny home on wheels, we highly recommend that you read Bulletin 291, Tiny Home on Wheels Permit Checklist. And also, like we just talked about, check your property for eligibility and conduct the property research, make sure you can place it correctly. And also share the Tiny Home on Wheels permit checklist with the company or manufacturer selling a tiny home on wheels. And certainly if you or the manufacturer or the company selling it have any questions about the tiny home on wheels or whether it will qualify in San Jose, send us an email and we can follow up with you. That wraps it up for my piece. Next up, I'll pass it to Jacob Switch, Planner 2, to talk about how to apply for a tiny home on wheels permit.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everybody. As Sarah mentioned, I'll go over how to apply for a tiny home on wheels permit. So first things first, as mentioned a few times already, Bulletin 291 is super important. Great checklist to use to stay on track for the permitting process. Throughout my slides, I'm going to kind of go over the important information that's highlighted in Bulletin 291. So a tiny home on wheels must be a detached self-contained unit. It's intended for separate living quarters from the main residence, and it's designed to have the look and feel of a conventional building, similar to the single-family residence we're kind of accustomed to seeing. We want to stay away from the look of an RV. Inside the tiny home on wheels should have all the basic Appliances and rooms for living, such as a full kitchen, full bathroom, sleeping quarters, and of course, living space. Below is a few pictures of a tiny home on wheels that has been approved in the city of San Jose. I'm going to slowly go over the pictures from left to right. Starting on the left, we have a nice living room that leads out to the exterior space. Moving on, we have a shower. And then if you turn around in that bathroom, obviously there's a sink and toilet behind it. And then moving on to the farthest right picture, we have the nice looking kitchen with the stairs that lead up to the loft, which in this case is the sleeping quarters. As you can tell, it's designed very well. Looks similar to a conventional residence, just a bit smaller. So along with the development standards, which I'll go on as we continue through the slides, the tiny home on wheels must be registered, inspected by various different entities, starting with the DMV. In order for the tiny home on wheels to move from point A to point B, the tiny home on wheels must be registered with the DMV. For the tiny home on wheels itself, as far as making sure it's built correctly and safely, there's a few different certifications that'll be required depending on the type of RV. So if you have a park trailer, which is similar to kind of what you see in a mobile home park, you'll be subject to the American National Standard Institute, ANSI standards. And if you have a more recreational vehicle, which is a vehicle that can be towed similar to a towable RV, you'll be subject to the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA standards. And both of these certifications must be given by third-party inspectors, not our City of San Jose inspectors. So those third-party inspectors are REVA, which is Recreational Vehicle Industry Association, and NOAA, which is the National Organization of Alternate Housing. And as I believe Sarah mentioned before, the tiny home on wheels should be towable with a bumper hitch, frame towing, or a fifth wheel connection, and it cannot move under its own power. So tiny home on wheels placement on the lot. So a couple of things to be aware of are easements on your lot. The easements can be checked at the below link. They can also be found on the title report for the main residence. Another good thing to be aware of is if the property is on the historic resources inventory. The historic resources inventory can be accessed at the below link. I would highly recommend making sure that your house is or isn't on the historic resources inventory before starting a tiny home on wheels project. So continuing on with placement on the lot, the tiny home on wheels should be set back at least 6 feet from the main residence and any other building on site, and that would be wall-to-wall distance. The tiny home on wheels should be set back at least 45 feet from the front property line and has a minimum setback of 4 feet on each side. Continuing on with tiny home on wheels placement, if there are any trees, ordinance-sized trees, which is a tree that is greater than 36 inches in circumference, if the tree needs to be removed for placement of the tiny home on wheels, a tree removal permit is required, and the tree removal permit can be submitted to the planning department for approval. So now moving on to some design and size standards. The tiny home on wheels shall not exceed 400 square feet, but has to be at least 150 square feet in size. It shall not be any greater in height than 16 feet and 2 stories. And the undercarriage, which is the wheels, the axles, the tongue, and the hitch, all be hidden from public right-of-way. An example of public right-of-way would be the street or the sidewalk. So continuing on with design standards, the exterior material shall exclude single-piece laminate composites and interlock metal sheeting. Like I said, we want to stay away from the RV or streamlined type look. The windows shall be double pane glass and including an exterior trim to make it look nice. The doors and windows shall not be rounded, and the roof shall have at least a 2 to 12 pitch for greater than 50% of the roof area, and the roof may not be composed of wooden shingles. All exterior walls and roof shall be fixed, so that means no slide outs, no tip outs, and no other forms of mechanically articulating room area extensions. And mechanical equipment, which could be AC or any equipment like that, shall not be located on the roof. It should be integrated into the structure. And if it's placed on the exterior of the structure, it shall maintain a 5-foot setback from the rear and side property lines. And that's from the projecting face of that mechanical unit. So parking standards. So there's no required extra vehicle parking for a tiny home on wheels. As far as the tiny home on wheels itself being parked, it is required to be located on a paved parking pad. And we'll go over that more in the next slide. So the parking pad should be a resilient surface. So a resilient surface could be either paved or compacted. We have a few different examples here. So a couple compacted would be, decomposed granite or crushed rock. So any surface that's resilient and not going to allow the tiny home on wheels to kind of sink into the ground. That'd be what we're looking for. So once you've gone through the checklist and if you're able to check yes on all the boxes, now comes time for submittal. So when you're getting ready to submit, just know that everything is going to be electronic and everything should be in PDF form. It's super important to have a complete submittal, a complete architectural plan set submittal, which includes a site plan, which is a bird's eye view of the lot showing the tiny home on wheels, the tiny home on wheels setbacks from the property line, the tiny home on wheels setbacks from the main residence, maybe the location of any trees. And also it is good to show the mechanical unit on the site plan as well, so you could show its setbacks. And then also good to have elevations, so we can see the height, the design, make sure the windows have trim. We can see what kind of exterior siding is going to be on it. And then the floor plan, which would be the interior layout of the tiny home on wheels. So we call that a complete architectural submittal, and that will be required for planning approval. So on the site plan, please also include the various electrical and plumbing items that are listed in Bulletin 213. And also provide as much detail as possible, which would include any requirements like the registration, certifications, or inspections, which we talked about in previous slides. So once you have your complete site plan ready to go, or your complete submittal, ready to go, please contact the ADU ally to get the ball rolling for the submittal. The ADU ally will route the files to the city permit specialist who can help you complete the submittal process. After submittal, planning reviews the architectural plan set, which would be the site plan, the elevations, and the floor plan. After you receive planning approval, electrical and plumbing site connections will be inspected. And at this time, a tiny home on wheels cannot be pulled online. And to the right, you have an example of a site plan. Notice how it's showing the setbacks from the property lines, setbacks from the house. It even shows, an outline of the house, any trees on site. And this particular one even, shows the parking pad, the towing hitch, and all that good information that we're looking for. So with that, I'll pass it over to Bruce Campbell, who is the building inspection manager. He's going to go over tiny home on wheels inspection requirements.
Good afternoon, everyone. So a lot of information. Just want to say that make sure that you are reviewing and understanding all that documentation and that you're working through that checklist and that you know what the requirements are. Really important. That's what the inspectors are going to be verifying when they come out in the field. So once you get your permit issued, you're going to be given a permit record. This is received during issuance. It's going to capture the history of your inspections. It also has some detailed information on there about the amount of inspection time that's accompanying the permit. It's going to have contact information for the building field coordinator and steps to see your inspection status online and the methodology for scheduling and canceling inspections. So after your approval to schedule or cancel an inspection, you can do it via our website, or you can do it through our call center. The number is posted up there and also given on the permit document. You must, if you're going to cancel an inspection for whatever reason, not ready, it rained, my trench is full of water, what have you, please do that 48 business hours in advance by 2 p.m. on the preceding day, Because if you don't do that, you lose that inspection hours, and you may potentially have to purchase more inspection time. There's also information on how to find your inspection records online at this link. If you have questions or you need assistance with inspections, or you have building code questions, your first best point of contact is the building field coordinator that is listed on your permit, and they're assigned by area within the city of San Jose. On the reverse side of your permit card, you're going to see a long list of inspections. This is the progress record, if you will. Keep in mind, not all these inspections listed here are required for tiny homes on wheels. This is an all-encompassing card with a record that covers all projects within the city of San Jose. Most likely, you're only going to be required a few of these for a tiny home on wheels. So don't get overwhelmed by this list of inspections on the backside of the card, but it is an important place to document progress of your project. So follow your approved architectural, plumbing, and site plans to assure a correct installation of the tiny home on wheels itself, the utility lines and the connections and so forth. Keep in mind that the electrical and plumbing plan review is not done at the time of submittal. This is done by the field inspector in the field at the time of inspection. So it's really important to have all the information pertaining to those available to the field inspector at the time of the first inspection. And also, if you have questions, really a good time to bring those questions forth and get answers to those questions. So there's Bulletin 291, which we've talked about. The inspector is going to be verifying that you've met all those requirements that we just talked about in Jake's presentation. Setbacks, mechanical equipment, where the pad's located, the look of the tiny home on wheels, and so forth, right? They'll also be looking for that. I think we're going to talk about this later, but they're going to look for that sticker and that third-party inspection verification on that tiny home on wheels. So again, 6 feet from single-family home or any other building or structure greater than 120 square feet. Keep in mind easements, the required setbacks. Look up for power lines. Look up for those service drops. You can't place a tiny home on wheels underneath a service drop because there's certain clearance requirements between a service drop and a flat roof, and it's pretty substantial. It's like 8 feet. So if you pull a tiny home in wheels under that service drop we had a picture of earlier, you can see that that would probably be almost touching the roof, and that's not an acceptable installation. It presents a significant safety hazard for those wires. And then of course trees, right? If you're removing trees, you would have to go through that tree removal process that Jake talked about earlier. So really important to be prepared for your inspections. Again, if you have questions ahead of doing the work and you have your permit, please reach out to the field coordinator. They're a wealth of knowledge and information, and it's always easier to resolve a problem we say on paper ahead of building something, and then I have to rebuild it. It's a lot easier to fix things by asking questions or resolving the design issues on paper before I actually do the installation. So the reference documents for these tiny home on wheels permits are the California Plumbing Code and the California Electrical Code. The current version that we're enforcing is the 2019 version of that code. And then again, this references you back, as Sarah indicated, to 1 through 14 on the Bulletin 213 inspection checklist for ADUs, because the utility connections are very, very similar. Keep in mind, tiny home on wheels is going to require typically more than one inspection, at least 2, because you're going to be installing underground utilities for electrical, water, and sewer. And those need to be inspected and approved before they are covered or concealed. So at least 2, 1 for underground before you cover, and then typically another for final. At the time of that first inspection, inspector is going to be asking questions about the sewer and the water and the electrical capacities, right? These utilities are typically designed to support that original single family structure that's on the site, and may not have the capacity for the added load or demand that the tiny home on wheels is going to place on those utilities. Also, keep in mind, some of these utilities may be aging out and may be actually in need of repair or replacement before I impose additional stresses on them. So don't cover anything up till we look at it and approve it, and then you can move on. So a couple things to keep in mind, and recognize this is a brief presentation, so it's really impossible for us to try to cover every nuance of any given site. Each site's going to have its own idiosyncrasies and its own separate, probably, set of challenges that have to be overcome or addressed. But first off, sewer must drain by gravity unless absolutely prohibited by conditions at the site. It's very rare that you cannot achieve gravity drainage on a given site. And you want gravity because it's essentially a gravity system. When it's properly installed, you're never going to have problems with that system over the lifetime of that system. It's a good way to go. Mechanical systems, subject to breakdowns, maintenance problems, all kinds of issues. So if you're going to propose a mechanical sewage ejector pump, please make sure you've exhausted all the gravity, the ability to get gravity on that particular site. And before you purchase it, please reach out to the field coordinator and have a conversation about it. Again, most likely you will be able to achieve gravity. Most sewer line connections are 3 to 4 feet deep at the sidewalk or close to the sidewalk, where you tie in, and you can almost always, under those conditions, get enough drop to where the tiny home on wheels would be located. So you want to go back, sir? So talk about the pictures a little bit, sorry. So the picture on the left just shows a typical open trench with utilities in it. There's a 4-inch sewer line with a slope of about 1/8 of an inch per foot. There's 1.5 inch plastic water main. And I don't know if you can see from the picture, there's kind of a wire wrapped around that pipe. It's one of the requirements for using that material that a tracer wire be installed along with that pipe in case they have to locate it later. They can use that tracer wire to locate that water pipe. So be familiar with the materials you're installing and what the requirements are for those materials. On the right-hand side is an upgraded water main starting at the water meter. So what this represents is an existing 3/4 inch water meter with a water main that's been upgraded to 1.5 inches. Okay. Thank you. Here, again, just a reminder, don't cover up any trenches or holes or whatever you've exposed to do your work and your tie-ins. Please leave those open and available for inspection so that the inspectors can look at it and approve it and make sure there's not any issues with it moving forward. This picture on the right is a connection of a 4-inch sewer going into the existing house. The existing house is the one that's going straight, and the tie-in for the tiny home on wheels is the one coming in from the left. And again, make sure you're using the right materials. Just a note, I was showing this to one of the plumbing inspectors, and he's like, did that get approved? I don't think those bands are the correct bands, those metal bands, because they're corrugated. So they should be smooth typically. Those corrugated bands are okay, but only if they're stamped and listed as being suitable for the material on which they're installed. So again, just a piece of advice to make sure you're familiar with the materials and the products that are being installed, that they meet code and are listed for the purpose and are suitable for the purpose of which they're being utilized. So tiny home on wheels, it requires a flexible connection to all the utilities, electric, water, and sewer. Plumbing utility connection points must be within 4 feet of the pad. And per San Jose Municipal Code 17.845, connection to natural gas is prohibited. So the potable water connection shall be located on the rear half of the pad on the same side of the tiny home on wheels as the manufacturer's supplied connection, which is typically on the left-hand side. The water riser pipe shall be located within 4 feet of the pad and shall be equipped with a threaded spigot located between 12 and 24 inches above grade for the attachment of a standard water hose. The water riser pipe shall be protected from physical damage. Water supply piping needs to be appropriately sized. We talked about this a little bit earlier, that the initial utilities for that single family home were really designed to support that home. So we need to make sure that as we're adding demand on these systems, that we're installing these systems adequate to meet the extra demand of the tiny home on wheels. So the inspector is gonna ask for a water piping size calculation. And this goes back to the site plan that Jake was talking about. It's good for us to have that information so that we can see how long the pipe is, where the water meter is located, the size of the water meter, size of the water piping, where the tie-in is going to take place, and what the pressure is coming in to the home. All these things impact how much water can be supplied based on demand. The demand is based on what we call water supply fixture units, or, think of it as a sink uses so much, a toilet uses so much, a dryer or washing machine uses so much, right? And you add all that up and it creates the demand. So we're trying to make sure that the water line is sized properly to meet the demand for everything that's taking place on the lot, on the property. So it should include the connection for the tiny home on wheels, the sizing of that, where you're connecting it, and so forth. So the sewer drainage connection adjacent to the pad shall consist of a sewer riser firmly embedded in the ground, extending vertically to grade and protected against damage from movement. The minimum diameter of the sewer riser shall not be less than 3 inches and shall be provided with a 4-inch inlet or not less than a minimum 3-inch female fitting. Needs to be located within 4 feet of the pad on the same side as the manufacturer supplied connection, typically the left. Needs to be provided with a tight fitting a plug or cap, and that shall be secured by a durable chain to prevent loss. Please provide a site plan to the inspector showing the new sewer line and the point of connection to the existing sewer line, and show the size and the type of material that's going to be installed. A minimum size 4-inch line for the sewer is going to be required if there are 4 more toilets. So if I already have 3 toilets in my main residence and the tiny home on wheels adds a 4th, I now require a 4-inch line to accommodate the 4 toilets. If a sewage ejector pump is being installed and you've again exhausted all possibilities for gravity drainage, a sewage ejector pump also requires to be discharged into a 4-inch sewer line. And also, if to get gravity, you need to install the piping at a slope less than a 1/4 inch per foot. You are allowed to do 1/8 of an inch per foot, but only on a 4-inch or larger pipe. So that brings us to the electrical connections. So again, it's back to that conversation. What was this electrical service depicted on the right-hand picture? What was it designed for, and what capacity does it have, and what load am I now imposing on this piece of equipment? So we need to determine the minimum capacity that's going to be required for the tiny home on wheels, but we also need to know what's being demanded by the existing home, particularly in these days and times when many homes have added electrical vehicle chargers and things of that nature, which really increase the demand on these older pieces of equipment. So the calculated load is going to be asked for by the field inspector, and this is a calculation that whereby the demand for the tiny home on wheels and the existing single-family home are get added together to create the total new demand that's going to be placed on that piece of equipment. So we need to know what that demand is so that we can verify that this piece of equipment can meet that demand and has the capacity to do it. If it doesn't, you're going to have to upgrade the service, because the service is going to be required to meet the demand of the tiny home on wheels plus the single family home that's existing. So just a couple of notes on that. If tiny home on wheels is evaluated to the RV standard, which is that NFPA 1192, the load for the tiny home on wheels is 100% of the circuit breaker that's supplying that tiny home on wheels. So we had a conversation this morning about one that was 50 amps. And what that simply means is I just added 50 amps of demand or load onto this piece of equipment. And that has to be factored in to make sure that piece of equipment can accommodate that added demand. If it's evaluated to the park trailer standard, there is an allowance in there to use a calculation that's included in the National Electrical Code, the Article 220.82 for calculating optional method. And so that's another way to go about it, but you would need to be technically versed in load calculations and how that works and what those numbers look like and how to do that calculation. The supply receptacle for the cord and plug connected tiny home on wheels must be within 5 to 7 feet of the pad and must be located to accommodate the maximum cord length, typically 25 feet, supplied with the tiny home on wheels. If it's evaluated to the park trailer standard, they're permitted to be hardwired using flexible wiring method, such as liquid tight flexible metallic conduit or liquid tight flexible non-metallic conduit. And these would be connected to the manufacturer supplied connection point. If being supplied by a receptacle to meet that cord that's in the bullet point above, the receptacle needs to be the same configuration as that cord cap that comes with the tiny home on wheels. And because no adapters or extension cords are allowed to be utilized. Now, after all that, we finally get to the end where we're taking a look at the final inspection. So one of the things that the inspector is going to do is they're going to be looking for that label that's been applied by the third party to the tiny home on wheels that tells us that it's been inspected and it has been certified to one of those standards, and it'll have the third party designation on there as who did the inspection. So they're going to be looking for that to make sure that work has been done. We don't do that work, but we do verify that the appropriate agency has performed that evaluation and that inspection. The electrical and plumbing final inspection can be scheduled once the tow's been placed and connected to the utilities and ready to be moved into once the tiny home on wheels has been placed. Inspectors verified all those previous requirements that we spoke of. And all the final inspections have been approved and signed off on your permit card. And then the status of the permit reads final within our system in sjpermits.org.
All right, well, thank you so much, Bruce and Jake, for sharing that great information. I hope that everybody has found it useful. We do have some additional time, about 15 minutes. So we mentioned polls at the beginning of the webinar. So we'll start one of those, ask for your feedback. I'm going to take a look at the questions that we have received. And then we can answer some as we receive them. Okay, so I've launched the poll. What type of ADU project are you interested in? You can select multiple. Okay, so our first question, does a trailer such as a 20-foot travel trailer qualify as a tiny home on wheels? So either Bruce or Jake, if you want to answer, tackle that.
I can start with that one. So it could potentially be qualified as a tiny home on wheels. Obviously, it would have to meet all those checklist requirements that I went through. One of the main ones would be that 12-2 roof pitch. It would have to meet that, as well as the other design requirements, you know, having window trim, no curved doors, stuff like that. So potentially yes, as long as you're able to go through the tiny home on wheels checklist and click yes to every little bullet point, it could potentially be permitted as a tiny home on wheels.
Thank you, Jake. All right, so we're still getting some answers from the poll.
And just to piggyback on that one, it shouldn't be able to be driven on its own power like a vacation style RV, and it should look similar to a conventional single family residence. Should have characteristics of a single family residence, right? Not look exactly like, but you want to have that look and feel of an actual residence, you know, not so much of an RV in the backyard.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, so we have the results of the poll. The majority of you want tiny home on wheels information. ADUs kind of come in second. Garage conversions are close third or tied with second. So thank you so much for sharing that information. I really hope to receive the feedback and provide some more webinars to share this information based on what you're interested in. Thank you so much. Okay, so I shared the results from that. We had another question about any water or sewer connections allowed. So we did answer that live on the during Bruce's presentation. Yes, water and sewer connections are required. He gave some details. If you have extra questions about that, the guest that joined, feel free to use the ADU Ally contact information if you have additional questions, so we can give you some more feedback if you need some. All right, the next question. Are there differences between RVs and tiny home on wheels service hookups? Would you like to tackle that, Bruce?
So I guess what I would say about that is it depends on which standard those have been evaluated to. I believe the RV standards are more portable in nature, so they're going to be quick water hose connection, a cord and plug connected device, and then a sewer attachment that probably just adapter screws right into that sewer connection. Whereas I think park trailers are somewhat less transient, or considered somewhat less transient in nature, and that's why they have that different ability for the load calculation, and they also have the ability to be hardwired. But the connections still need to be flexible regardless, because these do sit on wheels. And as much as you might block them in or lock them in place, in the event of an earthquake or something like that, these are still going to move around. And we want to try to make it to where those connections have some ability to move as that park trailer or RV moves.
Thank you, Bruce. Okay, so we have another quick poll. Actually, I think I'll wait until the end. So we'll keep moving on with some questions and answers. So just to clarify, aside from planning permits, does a tiny home on wheels need a building permit as well? So planning reviews your architectural drawings, and you'll need to also provide, like Jake was talking about and Bruce, provide those electrical and plumbing plans as well. So after planning provides review and approval from planning is given, an electrical and plumbing permit will be issued. There is no building permit required. Bruce, do you want to add any information, or Jake?
No, what you said is correct. And I think it's related to the fact that, flat work in general does not require a building permit. There's no real structural element to it. And as Jake can say, the planning document defines what that surface needs to look like. kind of anticipating the loads that will be imposed similar to a driveway from when that trailer is parked.
Thank you. Okay, so we have another question. Can you install more than one tiny home on wheels on a property? If yes, what are the requirements? So going back to the earlier bit of the presentation, tiny home on wheels may not be proposed if you have an existing detached ADU or already a tiny home on wheels. So only one detached ADU of any kind may exist or be proposed on a property with a single family home. And also to share the information again, if there is an attached ADU or a junior ADU, you may propose a tiny home on wheels on a lot that does qualify. Anything that you want to add, Jake or Bruce?
Oh, that was perfect.
Okay, let's see. So there's another question. Any capacity charges for water and sewer? Can we answer that question or do we need some more details?
Yeah, I don't know the full answer to that, but I think because there's no address, the county probably doesn't tax these like they would an addition, right? You might want to look into that a little bit further, but I think because these are transient in nature, it's a different, and there's no address associated with it, it's probably a different requirement. And then you might also want to ask ESD that question.
Okay.
Because they're the ones who do the sewer and the trash and so forth, right?
All right. So the guest that answered or asked that question, sorry, if you want to provide us more details, send an email to the ADU Ally email address. It's listed here, and ask that question, provide a little bit more details, and then we can connect you with the experts to give you a more of a detailed answer to get you to the point where you're comfortable with the response. Okay, so we have another question. Will the presentation be shared so that you can refer to it and access the links? Yes, we will share the presentation. It will be on our ADU web pages, and the presentation will also be recorded and posted on the Permit Center YouTube page and our Facebook page. And you can follow us using those social media links down below. Okay, so we have a final question. What are the dimensions of the trailer? I believe maybe your question is how large could it be? So tiny home on wheels can range from 150 square feet up to 400. If you want to propose an ADU that's larger than 400, you can pursue the ADU or the junior ADU type of project. And if you want additional information about that, you can visit our web pages. And if you have particular questions, you can send an email to the ADU Ally email address down below. Okay, so we've reached the final questions and we have about 7 minutes left. So I'll share this last poll. And it's really about, did you find this information helpful? And we'd really like to know. Okay, we're still getting some results. Most people are saying yes, so we're so thrilled to hear that it's very helpful to you. If you have said that it's somewhat helpful and you still need some information, go ahead and send your additional questions to the ADU Ally email address. And we have about 6 minutes before we end, so if you have some additional questions, feel free to share them through the Q&A. If you have specific questions about requirements on a particular lot, send them via email to the ADU Ally email address and we can give you those responses right back. Okay, so we've got some really great responses through the poll and I'm going to end it now and share those results with everybody. So it sounds like we've done a pretty good job of sharing some useful information. If you want more, we'd really love to hear what your questions are or what you'd be interested in. And if you said somewhat useful and you have some extra questions, go ahead and send them via email on over to me. I answer the ADU Ally email address, and I'd really love to hear from you. All right, well, with that, we can end about 5 minutes early. So thank you so much for joining us. Reach out to us if you have any questions. And thank you so much one more time to our fabulous staff members, Jake, Planner 2 in our planning department, and Bruce Campbell, Building Inspection Manager from our building department. Let us know if you have any questions. I personally look forward to hearing them, and thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.